Okay, The Impossible Box is the most recent episode of Star Trek Picard, and we'll talk about that in just a sec. Hello out there, I'm the oldest nerd, and a few things that are interesting in this episode of Star Trek Picard. First of all, we know that now Picard gets to go to the Borg cube. We won't go into the details of how he got there, but it causes Raffi to sink even deeper into her depression after seeing her son reject her in the previous episode. She's now pretty much been rejected by the rest of Starfleet, or the last person there that had any regard for her. And all this for Picard. In this particular case, losing her son is a different deal. At any rate, she's kind of falling down a pit, and we'll see her have to come out of it in the same way that Picard is going to have to get over his difficulties with the Borg. Now, when he was talking with Seven of Nine in the last time we saw her, she was asking if he had gotten over his experience with the Borg. He said, yeah. She said, completely. And he said, no. And we see a lot of that no in this episode as he goes aboard the cube himself and is to the point of almost anxiety attacks over this familiarity. Although the familiarity, other than the ones and zeros that you see where parts of the ship show this kind of subtle little set decoration, the rest of it looks a lot like Blade Runner in the Deckard's apartment, where there are these shapes, these rectangular shapes all the way through, and light coming out of cracks almost, it would seem. This is something that looks very Blade Runner-ish, and not the only thing they've borrowed from it. Now we show that Soji has photographs. This was something that was very apparent by the replicants in Blade Runner. They always carried photographs with them to kind of remind them of a certain amount of humanity that they never had. Even though they knew that they weren't real, they had these photographs to kind of cling to for one reason or other, perhaps to make their artificial brains work. And there was some talk of that in this episode where Narek is telling his sister, who is impatient that he get on with breaking her and getting information that they need out of her, by saying that there is a certain amount of dealings within the brain of thinking that one is human and having to come to terms with the fact that one is not. And so that's kind of at play here in the same way. Now, if you're going to steal from somebody, steal from Philip K. Dick, who is probably the best writer ever on subjects of synthetic humans, or androids, if you will. There's an interesting place where Soji wants to know of Narek's real name. Apparently, the Romulans have a name that they share with the public and a name that they only do in private. And Narek finally in the episode reveals himself to have a name of his private name is Hri-Yan, I believe it is, and Narek to the outside world. Now, this is reminiscent of Dune, where the Paul Atreides, who is our hero in this, has to assume a private name, which is Usul, and then the public name, which I've forgotten, but it's something that has 4 or 5 syllables in it that indicates his strength as a warrior. And I think that they're pulling that in the modern Romulans from that as well. So I found that kind of interesting. There are a few good lines in here in which Elnor gets butting in backwards. He said, "Am I in butting?" That's kind of funny. Also, a description of space, which sounds almost like Dr. McCoy in the reboot. Space, it's cold, it's empty, and it's trying to kill you. It seems like a paraphrase of what he said in the first Star Trek reboot picture, and I think it's been used somewhere else too. I'll have to look up that, or maybe one of you can and let me know about it, because that's something I seem to have heard before. Space, it's cold and empty, and it's trying to kill you. Then They show Romulan ale in here among the dozens of Easter eggs that are always in these episodes. Where actually Romulan is drinking it for the first time that we've ever seen it, and whether its intoxicating effects have the same level of intoxication to Romulans as it does to humans, they don't say. Also, a description of by Rafi to her Starfleet friend, saying that Picard is so Federation, he's probably still in the brochures. I thought that was funny too. So those are what I gather in this episode of Picard. And I'd like to know what you think about it, and let me know in the comments. Meantime, please subscribe and ring the bell so you know when the next video is coming. I'll warn you right now, though, that the next Picard video will be a little later than usual. I'm going to be taking some time away. It is coming up on my 30th wedding anniversary, and my wife and I are going to take a week away from the camera. So the Picard video coming next will be probably a couple of days later. And we'll have, though, the finale on Doctor Who at its regular time. So stay tuned for that. In the meantime, don't go far.